Hello, I'm here with John Warren from King's College London. John, in your understanding, what is diplomacy?
Well, it's a very good question, Simon. I think the word or the expression I like the most is actually from the Vienna Conventions, which is creating friendly relations between countries. And I think it's quite a sort of a gentle term, friendly relations, but there's quite a lot loaded in there. So overall, I would say that the purpose of diplomacy is about developing some form of appreciation, understanding and friendly relations with countries. Of course, achieving that is far harder than setting it out as your purpose.
And in trying to achieve that, what are the markers of success in diplomacy from your point of view?
Well, look, I think the starting point is, are you talking? I think one of the features, you go back to antiquity here, you look through history, the starting point is there some form of dialogue and some form of connection between two states or tribes or civilizations or forms of power. So I would start with some form of dialogue. And as we know, if you look back in antiquity, generally speaking, at most times, some form of diplomatic relations were supported, even when societies or civilizations were at war. So clearly, even going back 2,000 years, people would have recognized that you needed things like parley, the ability to talk to each other, and the ability to send delegates and the ability to make representations. So I think these things have always existed in human affairs, but I would say the starting point is some form of dialogue. Clearly, from dialogue, you can build some form of understanding of reciprocal positions, and then we get into the negotiation, adaptation, and all the higher forms of statecraft.
Okay. And conversely, what do you think are the markers of failed diplomacy in that sense?
Well, interestingly, and you and I have talked about this in the past, I think boycott is an interesting thing. Boycott, very popular in the modern world. Boycott is the kind of conscious severing of any form of dialogue. So I do think that if the starting point for me is in dialogue, then possibly the point where diplomacy has completely failed is when there is no possibility for dialogue. And again, as we were saying earlier, given the fact that states have found ways to have dialogue even when they are at war with each other, I do think that is the starting point. And the absence of dialogue, I think, ends the possibility for any improvement and rapprochement. So I would be very, very, very careful about the ending of dialogue.
And in terms of, we've spoken here about statecraft and nation states conducting diplomacy. Where else have you seen diplomacy in action? How else does it manifest itself in the modern world?
Well, I've spent a good deal of my professional career working for the British Council, which is a cultural body whose purpose is to build cultural relations between the UK and other countries. So clearly, most of my work in the diplomatic sphere has been around expanding people-to-people relationships, expanding cultural appreciation, linguistic appreciation, educational appreciation. So very much more what's sometimes called soft power, the broader range of ways in which people can engage with people or countries can engage with countries. So I would very much be of the view that there is a very broad palette of actions that a state, a country, or even a person can take in the modern world to influence the behaviour of other states, cultures and people.
And thinking about in your experience of having seen diplomacy play out across that broad field, who are the best exponents you've come across, either individually or sort of that you become aware of over your experience?
Well, one of the things I've always found is that if you go to countries which have perhaps a very different philosophy than the country you're from, a very different culture, very different belief system, what you tend to find is there are some broad universals which everybody connects with. So one of them is languages. Languages are terrifically successful. Most societies are very passionate about education and schooling. And then there are the other kind of universal languages of humanity, like, for example, maths, science, sport, art and culture. So I think one of the things I've found is that the more difficult the relations are between two countries, so think about, for example, in the recent past, the UK and Iran, or at times the UK and Russia, the more likely you are to have success with those very neutral forms of dialogue, which are the universal languages of humanity: sport, science, culture, art. It's very, very rare that you find that you can't get some form of constructive conversation going with those topics. Just to digress momentarily, with Iran, I discovered that with weightlifting and wrestling, you can always get a conversation going.
Thanks very much, John.